Welcome to Performance Upgrades. I'm your host, Dave Moss. The show is brought to you by SportBikeWrench.com. Performance parts and professional advice. Remember, when you buy from Sport Bike Wrench, you support our programming here at On The Throttle. Install the leg, and then we're going to put the handlebar in place. That will stay there. It's got good tension on its own, so I'm not worried about that for now. Then we said we would set it back to stock at line number 2 because there are engraved lines on the fork outer tube. So we'll set it right there. And now we need to lock this fork in place. Chris just asked a great question. Is there any way to confuse the right and left leg? Sure. You could put them on backwards. The key is the inside of the casting is always much rougher than the presentation side, the finish side on the outside. So if you have the left leg, then obviously the rough part should point inwards, and conversely on the right leg. So that's an easy way of sorting it out. It's a little harder too because your adjuster is right in the middle instead of the outside of the leg. So always remember, the rough, unfinished machine piece is always facing the inside. So we'll go ahead and extract the bolt that was in the handlebar. And then we want to put the handlebar somewhat in position. We know it's going to bolt right up underneath, so we just quite simply need to line all of that up underneath. Put the bolt through, and just visually line it up and turn it just a couple of threads. That's all you need. Now we can repeat the process for the right leg and the right handlebar. That's very important to remember. Where does everything go? So you want to line everything up first and look at it. If you had taken photographs of pulling the bike apart, you would know, did the cables go inside? Did the cables go outside? Where did everything route in relation to the handlebar and the fork? At this point, if you got it wrong, you can simply remove the leg and change the process around. Now in this instance, it's pretty clear everything goes to the outside, so that's okay. But we have one piece we need to put on, which is the guide for the cables. So it's easier to put that on now, but visually seeing which way we have to do this is important before we take the next step. So hold the cables in place, pull that around, put it in position, right there. Make sure the pin's fully extended so it's all the way out. And then calmly, without much stress, try and get the pin and the plastic in alignment with the hole. It's going to take you a couple times, but don't get frustrated with it. Phew. That wasn't too bad. So now we're ready to go with our wire routing there. Let's grab our fork again. Make sure our cables are running the outside, which they are. Go ahead, take our bolt out. And let's run that all the way up. So line number 2. And then visually look all the way across and make sure that you've got them in exactly the same spot. If you're a perfectionist, you can use vernier calipers and measure from the top of the cap to the top of the triple clamp to make sure they're within 1/1000th of a millimeter. Now we'll put our bar in position. Now at this point, with everything in place, we're ready to fasten the bolts, get the torque wrench out, and set all the settings around here to the torque specs that we need as per the manual. Now that everything's set to spec, torque down, we can put our beautiful little black plastic covers over the Allen bolts that secure the handlebars to the upper triple clamp. And at this point, we have everything tight. Now, we haven't tightened this yet, and I always leave this to the last. But what I'm going to do now that we have everything done is actually loosen these two bolts first, and then go ahead and tighten this. Now again, you can use the steering stops to hold this in place to help you. We're in the right position on the ratchet, set it against the stop. It's a 36mm socket. And these don't need to be horrendously tight, about 60 foot-pounds is all you need. Now that that's tight, that has ensured that the upper triple clamp is seated correctly against our steering stem, against the handlebars themselves, and that everything is tight. So as a last check, if you put them to the middle, they should naturally fall to the side because we have a slight bias over to me. And that tells you that the head bearings are perfectly adjusted. So we can relax, tighten this back up, and we're done on this portion of the job. Next piece to go back in reverse order of how we disassembled everything is going to be the plastic guard and the horn. There are two bolts tapped under here ready to go. So put them back in exactly the same position. Just work it into the forks correctly. And then go ahead, line the 10mm head nut up. That's one. And that's two. Very important to get that part on first because our brakes are the next thing we need to put on. And our brakes are anchored here with the 8mm bolt that we took off before. So let's grab our brake system complete. We know that this is going up high. We know that these are going between the legs, so very carefully without hitting the chrome tube, move them through. Line up the bolt. And then position that over there where it can sit. And then you want to make sure that not only is the bolt in position, and we'll take that out for a second, but that this lines up not only in the angle, but that the down tube to the right leg is through the gap. So again, this is one of those just really awkward tasks that takes you just a little bit of patience. Once you've sighted the bolt, it's quite easy. But it's the angle and holding that in place that's absolutely critical. Now from this point on, as you do individual bolts, it's very good to go ahead and torque each one at a time because you don't want to forget as you move through components that you did or did not torque the bolt to spec. So as you go, tighten them up correctly on every single step because when you're done with the job, you don't have to scratch your head and wonder, did I do it or did I not, and have to go through everything again. Now for our master cylinder attachment to the handlebar, component has an up arrow. So you always want to be able to make sure the arrow is up and also the lettering should face you correctly. So if that's the case, we know that this has to go to our master cylinder this way on the handlebar. So let's get our reservoir out of the way. Set the master against the handlebar. Hold it in position with your chest, which makes it a lot easier to do. And then line the components up. Again, you only need to start a couple of threads on the top bolt. Once you got that, go to the bottom bolt. And then you always want to tighten the top bolt first so that the face is all the way flush against the reservoir. In finishing off our front brake componentry, we want to go ahead and make sure that our master cylinder reservoir is in place. So we took an Allen bolt out of that, which we'll push through. It attaches right there. And we'll go ahead and install this correctly. It's a little awkward again with the tension on the hose. So be very patient, just take your time, especially in not cross-threading this because it's very difficult to see. And once you've got it, and it's started by hand, then go ahead and take your Motion Pro T-handle to it. Now at this point, our entire braking system is in place. Our calipers are hanging loosely. We have the reflectors still attached to them. We went ahead and tightened up our 8mm bolt here. We've routed everything correctly all the way through, and the master cylinder is held firmly on the handlebar. So at this point, we're done. Our next job is to install the front fender and then go ahead and install the wheel. Then you need to take your reflector, mechanism, holder, and bolt and go ahead and locate those correctly on both sides next. Remember, there's a 10mm nut that goes on the back of this. At this point, all we have left to do is reinstall the front wheel. Do that, tighten everything by hand, then go ahead and install the calipers, torque the calipers to spec, and then make sure we bounce the front end and center the front wheel before tightening the pinch bolts. At this point, we're ready to go ahead and put the bike back on the ground. I always tighten the wheel when it's on the ground, so Chris is going to come in, remove our jack stand, and then we're back on the ground. So go ahead and bounce the front. Now we'll tighten the pinch bolts on the forks, and lastly, we'll tighten the axle. So now that we've got the entire front end mechanically fitted back to the bike, we need to check everything else. We did not undo the throttle cable or remove it, so that's fine. Our electrical for our kill switch wasn't taken off, so we're good there. We know that our brake system is fully done. So, are we good there? Yes, we are. On this side, we have the harness coming around. We know this is for the gauges. We know we've got our headlamps and other switches here, so there's nothing to reconnect here. And we know that this is the turn signal off the right side fairing. We can leave that to one side. We have nothing to worry about. We have an exposed horn, so we need to wire that. So we'll take our horn wires here. And obviously there's a longer one and a shorter one, so the shorter one goes to the first one. Right there. And lastly, from this control, we have a loose wire here, and we have a couple of wires here. So it's pretty obvious with the snap connectors that we have available. We have 2, 4, 5 ports. We have a 2-port, and we have a very odd 2-port. They're all unique and individual, so there's only one place each one of these can plug in. When we're done with this, we're essentially finished with our job. So there's how to put back on the front end, including tensioning the head bearings, setting your geometry back to where it was stock, and also making sure that all your electrical connections are back where they should be. Our Project R6 is coming along nicely. It's a wheeler now, so now we're on the hunt for bodywork. So join us on our next show when we start piecing our bike back together. As always, we thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Performance Upgrades.